Good evening. I'm calling to order the Tuesday, February 27th meeting of the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And the call of roll, please.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Bundy. Here. Commissioner Chase.
Here.
Commissioner Friedman.
Here.
And Commissioner Lee.
Here. All right, thank you. So at this point, we have public comment for anything that is not on the agenda. You may speak for 3 minutes on something you wish to tell us or the town about. I don't think anybody's here for any other purpose than our public hearing. So we'll close the public comment section and move directly to our new hearings. So tonight, we have 406 Manzanita Avenue. This is a public hearing for design review application PL 2017-0123 and variance application PL 2017-0124 for the additions to the lower and upper floors of an existing two-story house. A variance is requested to allow maintenance of existing non-conforming parking. Before I turn it over to Mr. Bush, how many commissioners have been to the house besides myself? Phyllis, Bob?
I've been there.
I've been there.
Okay, so all have visited the property. Their story pulls up. Mr. Bush, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So this is a both a design review and a variance application. This is an existing two-story dwelling at 406 Manzanita with an application for additions at the upper and lower level with a variance related to parking to maintain an existing non-conforming the current parking availability. So we'll start by just looking at the neighborhood and kind of zeroing in on the property here. So, you know, in considering all these things as they relate to the required design review findings and the required variance findings as well. So here we have the subject property obviously highlighted here near the corner of Manzanita and Chapman, right off of Tamalpais. It's probably a 2-minute walk from where we're sitting right now. So the purpose of looking at this is it kind of shows you the standard shapes and sizes of the lots in the immediate vicinity. I think this is a 6,250 square foot lot, which is shared with a majority of the properties in the immediate vicinity here, with the exception, you know, as you get further away from Manzanita and you start to move up Chapman, or if you look at Rockland Court to the west. But in the immediate vicinity, just to the west here, there's three properties that are on lots that are about 2,500 square feet. But otherwise, it's quite consistent between those lots. Another thing that you can see here that we'll go into more detail about is just also the footprint. Sort of because you have this standard size lot, it's that much more interesting to sort of look at the pattern of development and see how the similarities and the differences, you know, what you can see between 406, 410, 416, you know, you have sort of a shared setback line from the front of the road, but then you see different variations about where houses are set back on the lot, like 426 or 417. So, you know, what these have most in common is really just that they're flat lots, many of which were built long ago. I think the subject property, the original house was built in 1913, so definitely one of the older ones in the neighborhood. Sort of moving on to a aerial or satellite view here a bit closer, again, we can sort of see the relationship of the existing property. Some of the things that make it unique are where it's sited and the setbacks that it does have, whereas many more of the houses have a more standard 5-foot or 6-foot setback. 5 foot is required on lots of this size as a minimum. This has about an 18-foot, almost an 18-foot setback on the west. So that creates sort of a, you know, significant space between this and the 3 properties to the west. Those properties clearly built either on or adjacent to the property line. and have basically no rear setback and very little yard space. So I think in speaking with some of those neighbors, this existing setback is valued and appreciated. Also, you see on this site that there is a significant setback from the rear property line as well, with some significant vegetation. There's a large tree in the backyard that you can see here. And you also see just how small this footprint is. Some of the houses just immediately to the west are around 950 square feet. I believe the existing house on the subject property is around 1,250 square feet. They're applying for 500 square feet addition to the top and just over 100 square feet on the bottom, but still largely maintaining this footprint, which is clearly much smaller than a majority of the houses in the vicinity, even those on lots that are 2,500 square feet, or around a third of what this site is. So kind of jumping right into the existing floor plan to sort of provide some context as to why we're seeing this application today. It's really due to the sort of dysfunctional footprint of the existing structure. You see the lower floor plan on the top there with the living room, the kitchen, and the guest room, or an office or a bedroom, as you will, with a bathroom there. And then on the upper floor, you have sort of just almost exactly half of the house rises to the second floor there, where you have two rooms that could be called bedrooms, although one of them is around just over 60 square feet. Is a very difficult, there's some real challenges that this floor plan presents. So what we're seeing as we move to the proposed floor plan is trying to take what's there and do as little as possible to improve the existing floor plan while adding some additional floor area as well. So you can see, I guess most notably, maybe on the upper floor, how the bedrooms have changed, and there's the addition of the master bedroom over what would now just be the single story portion of the house. So I think that's really the objective from the applicants. The reason for this proposal here is to make this house more livable. I believe they have 2 kids who are sharing a bedroom now, and the desire is to give them a bit more space. So that's the proposed floor plan. As you can see, as far as the master bedroom, it kind of continues the walls straight up from the existing, so it doesn't expand the footprint westward. We'll also look at a site plan that makes this a bit more clear. But this also shows how it's expanding about 6 feet to what would be the east on the upper and lower floor. Looking now just at the elevations of the existing, just sort of goes to show how the very simple sort of design of the existing house, where roughly half of the house just goes straight up there at that second floor, the existing second floor. Just a little history on it. That second floor has been there for decades. However, the roof line was raised, I believe, maybe about 10 years ago. That went through design review to be raised because previously the slope of the roof line created low ceiling heights in the upper floor, and that was necessary to create more kind of practical, livable area up there. Another thing you see is that there's sort of a front porch, front entryway. It sort of creates some articulation on the front elevation. If you're looking at the existing east elevation, it's just to the left there. And you also see how the roof line sort of echoed between the lower floor and the upper floor there, and then the chimney, and there's also a porch that sort of extends off the side yard. But currently no access into the rear yard unless you're going through the side of the house, which is a bit different than what we're more used to seeing. Here is the proposed elevation. Again, each one of these is in the same location. So you sort of see from the right or from the east elevation, you see how it's coming up above what was the lower floor, and also coming out toward the viewer there. You also see the addition of on the right here, on the north elevation, which is not easily viewed from any surrounding properties. It would be most visible just from the north, but there's significant trees and also over 65 foot distance between the neighbor that would be looking at that elevation. But from the rear yard, that's what it would look like. And you have the steps leading out toward the backyard. And then you have the west elevation, which is what would be seen from, I think it's 218 Chapman, 400 Manzanita. It's the 2,500 square foot lots that are just to the west of the property. Kind of shows how that fills in that space there. So as you can see, it maintains the existing architecture. It creates some additional articulation by sort of adding that addition that goes into the eastern side yard, which you can see from the south elevation, which would be the street elevation. Rather than just seeing that sort of straight box, you have an addition that goes off into the side yard and creates some shadow and creates some different, more interest to the shape of it, while retaining the porch that adds some sort of a welcoming, street-friendly elevation. So as we look at the design review findings and consider things like harmony with the neighborhood and whether the proposed additions are within scale and compatible with the neighborhood, both in terms of architecture and scale and massing and colors and materials, and also impact on neighboring residences. The way you do that is by going out there and looking at the architecture of the neighborhood. Obviously, this differs quite a bit than, say, Madera Gardens or Marina Green, or developments that all came at the same time. You have things that have changed over time here, and a real diversity of architectural style. So this is really just on Manzanita alone, within the immediate vicinity of the subject property. We had a beautiful day today, so got a chance to go out there and take some pictures for reference here. So these are a combination of 1- and 2-story homes on that street. As you can see, from the color to the architectural style and materials, it varies significantly between each. Just to show some of the juxtaposition between, like two-story homes here, and a more typical setback than what we see on the subject property, and sort of relationship again between a 1- and a 2-story house, again with very different sort of designs, colors, architectural features. From the balcony on the front elevation on the bottom right there, to then the porch on the single-story home there. Again, this is looking on Manzanita and looking at several homes on Chapman, just around the corner there, which are kind of built into a slope, so they differ somewhat in how they're built into the lots. But what this kind of shows is just that there is a diversity of architecture there, and a real range of scale, from everything from 950 square foot homes, not inclusive of the garage, to over 2,800 square feet, again not inclusive of the garage. So a real diversity of architecture, and the relevance of that and where that comes into play is when you're looking at harmony. When you have an established pattern of design throughout a neighborhood, something that's different stands out. When you have, when you have a lot of similarity, when you have diversity, there's much more freedom, I think, for architecture and for massing, and for how these houses are using the lots. So I think that helps to go to show that certain findings related to harmony and scale can be made. This is looking a little bit closer now. This is looking at the house that's immediately adjacent to the east. I think this is 410 Manzanita, single story. This is looking obviously toward the subject property, showing the story poles, and showing the significant amount of vegetation. Again, part of, vegetation provides some screening, which factors into the findings relating to neighborhood impacts. And it is important to note that certain vegetation stays green throughout the year. The leaves stay on. You can see the redwoods here, and in comparison to the, there's 3, I think, Japanese maples that sort of provide some screening between these. And that's both good and bad. If they're there for privacy reasons, or you get that privacy benefit that's there throughout some of the year and not throughout some of the rest, well, also you lose your leaves, and then you get sunlight that's provided between the properties. But this just goes to show that there is established vegetation sort of separating those two and affecting the existing availability of sunlight and providing some buffer between those properties. Then we're looking from the west here, or excuse me, from the south. This is showing a couple things. One is the adjacency of this house on the corner here on the very small lot. on the corner of Chapman and Manzanita, and also the existing single-car garage that's on the subject property. The variance that's being requested is to maintain that garage, which is essentially an existing non-conforming condition. The standards for the R1 zone require that they provide 2 off-street parking spaces. Both parking spaces must be 15 feet from the front property line, whereas the garage is 7 feet from the front property line. And they both have to be independently accessible. There are some homes on this street that provide 2-car garages. They're in a completely different orientation to this. There's quite a few homes that have single-car garages like this. Some of them are more set back from the street. Again, that might accommodate 2 spaces more easily on the site. But even then, you're not meeting the parking requirement because you're supposed to have 2 independently accessible spaces. Those would be tandem. And the other factor here is that if the garage, because our objective is always to work with the applicant as it relates to the zoning standards, development standards, and all those things, and look for ways and see if it's possible to meet those. In this case, they're requesting a variance because it's not reasonable, it's not really feasible to meet that. And also, I don't think it would be desirable in terms of impacts on adjacent properties. If the garage were moved back, it would be even closer to, well, not closer because it's right sharing the property line, but it would be in the line of sight of the rear yard and the rear windows on this corner house. So the existing location of the garage is really the most practical, and to require them to move it would be kind of, given all these factors, would be out of line with what's been applied to other properties. Now we're looking from the west. This is standing on Chapman, looking east and looking at the story poles here and how they sort of extend back, and where you see a portion of sky and trees in the distance that would block that view from here where we're standing on the street. Obviously the homes, well, not obviously, but the homes on this side of the street are, as we saw earlier, sort of set up above the street a bit, with many of their windows oriented toward the east. So they look out toward the neighborhood. They see the trees in the near distance primarily, and a little bit further away, they see homes that are in the neighborhood. And those are the primary views from these houses along the street. One of the neighbors on Chapman, I believe at 217 Chapman, provided a letter concerning view blockage from across the street here, looking toward there. And that's been included in the packet. There's also photos that were provided as part of that, provided from the neighbor looking through the windows in this general direction, and elevated above the street somewhat, given that that's where the house is located. And then this is the front elevation. Other than that west elevation, this is the most visible to the general community. And what's notable here is that this very little would change in this view. You'd have the extension into the side yard to the east there, but really that would, if anything, that would provide more visual interest, more architectural sort of, it would break up the walls a bit. I mean, it is a very simple sort of design as is, and the existing design would kind of carry that forward. So that was raised with the applicant, sort of that question of, does it make sense to sort of try to redesign the existing house as is, or try to work with the existing architecture? I think ultimately there's a number of reasons why they've gone the route that they have, and staff feels as though it's a very reasonable proposal. It's a very modest addition. It would increase the size of the structure to around 1,850 square feet with these additions, not inclusive of the garage, which is very, very much compatible with the neighborhood, well within the floor area ratio maximums for the R1 district. The fact that they're maintaining that western setback, maintaining that yard, and what is effectively sort of a rear yard for the neighbors that are adjacent there, is a real positive aspect of the project. Whereas they're only required to be 5 feet from that property line, they're maintaining 18 feet, which is obviously above and beyond what's what's required. And even as they expand into the eastern side yard, they're still exceeding what would be the minimum requirements. Where it would be 5 feet, they have a 6-foot distance from the neighboring property. And by not extending further into the rear yard as well, they also sort of maintain that clear corridor that I think is enjoyed by both 410 and which is to the east, and the neighbors to the west. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial aspect of the project to maintain largely the existing footprint. So ultimately, staff feels as though all the design review findings can be made, and encourages you to consider all the attachments in the packet, which include letters of support, some letters of objection or concern, and as well as some additional items that were provided. There's both color and materials sort of reference sheet. The intention is to maintain the existing materials and have them sort of wrap around the entirety of the house, and so that's provided by the architect. There's also a couple additional letters of support from neighboring property owners, and there's one additional letter that came in this afternoon that is included as well. And I think that's the extent of the materials that have been provided after the packet. But that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Doug. As usual, very good, thorough. Commissioners, for staff, do you have any questions? Dr. Bundy?
Yes. Doug, I had visited Mr. Selby's house and viewed that from the windows in his house that are facing to the east. And I wonder for all of us if we could, we've struggled with this issue of view blockage or view impact. And we focused a lot on maintaining views of Mount Tam, views of the distant hills, views of the bay. And as I look at Mr. Selby's situation, he has a view looking into the backyards of the houses further down. And so it seems like it's maybe a 200-yard view before it gets closed in with trees. He, I think, used to have a bit of a view of the bay, but the trees have really closed that in. So we're not really looking at a distant view of Mount Tam, but there is a perception of distance, a perception of not being so closed in. The addition, and I can understand why the applicant and the architect came up with this addition, given the lot, given the narrowness of the lot, and what you could really do on a first floor expansion. How are we to look at views that are not of Mount Tam, but there is intermediate distance to the views that will be somewhat closed in if this is approved?
I think it's a good question, and I absolutely respect, the concern of having sort of the existing view, whatever the features may be that are in that view. I mean, regardless, you grow used to seeing something a particular way, and you want to maintain that. In this case, I think, more often, you're right, we are looking at sort of identifying these specific features. Oftentimes, TAM, the bay, these things are called out in the general plan and in the zoning ordinance, because I think it's understood that there are these particular specific features that are sometimes part of a view, and they're I guess given some extra weight. But I think regardless of what those features are, we consider, both near and distant views, whether they have those specific local features or their views of the neighborhood. I mean, it's all considered as part of a view impact. I think, we don't have clear definition of what constitutes a view. It's very much a case-by-case basis. And in this case, we're looking at, we've also taken into account not just the features, but the proportion. What are the features in the existing view? How much of this would be blocked? And ultimately, what we're looking at is trying to find a balance and trying to find, that line that's reasonable between what is a view blockage and what's a significant and adverse view blockage. In this case, it's not so much that staff takes a position that this wouldn't block views, because this certainly would change the existing condition, but not to the extent to which we feel it would be a significant blockage, and that's our distinction. I don't know if Adam wants to add anything to that.
Well, and we've talked about this in the past, and I think we have given you, the commission in the past, as much and all the references to views in the town's general plan and zoning ordinance. I think the key thing that Doug hit on is this idea of balance, and the commission over time, they see a lot of these projects. The balance is between what is a significant and adverse effect on somebody else's view versus the homeowner's ability to actually invest in their property and make some improvements to their home. Ultimately, this is, as Doug mentioned, a case-by-case evaluation. And I think there's a considerable amount of judgment and discretion that the commission has to use to make that determination. Obviously, there's past experience, and we've seen many different examples, many different houses, many different effects of additions to houses on particular views. And the only other thing I would mention would just be it's an expanse of the view from all windows. We don't just, there's the impact of additions on views from the property or another property, which means all the views in a particular house. So that's one thing I would just clarify there. But
Thank you.
it's as much as we can provide on that one.
Okay, that's it, Bob?
Yeah.
All right, Phyllis.
No questions.
All right, to my left here, Jennifer.
No questions.
And
Nope,
Mr.
no questions.
Nothing, okay. Doug, roughly, what would be the lot coverage, or square footage lot coverage to get to 40%? How many square feet would that be to get to 40% of lot coverage from 25%? So I'm just trying to figure that out.
You got the calculator out?
Yeah,
All right.
it's what?
So it's a 6,250 square foot lot
Yeah,
times point four.
oh, that's right, so 2,500 would be,
Yep.
and then he's got 1892. So it's the total. So we've got 600 square feet roughly possible. And guess what? It's about a 600 square foot addition to the house. So just in rough numbers, all things being what they are, if they put an addition on the side of the house, it could be a 600 square foot addition. And it would come right up against the 5-foot setback on the property line, right? If it were on one floor. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, I think the total square footage could easily fit on a single, the addition could fit on a single level if that's what you're
Right,
getting
but
at
it would,
there.
as we looked at it there on site, it would create sort of an imposing structure against the neighbor as well, if it were done like that.
Yeah, I think we did obviously, I mean, as our design guidelines talk about, we do have existing, talk about encouraging first floor design and so on, and we did talk about that with the applicant. I think the applicant will speak to the reasons why that wasn't further considered. I mean, it has a lot to do with, I think, cost considerations and accessibility, the yard itself and the value that provides the existing family. So,
Absolutely.
but
Right,
we
just
do,
to-
yeah, I understand what you're.
Just to address it, in that way. So, okay. Thank you. So at this point then, we would give the applicant time to make their presentation. Is that going to be Mr. Harlock or the owner?
It's a team effort here.
All right. Great.
Commissioners Mike Harlock.
We have a microphone issue here, I'm sure.
Speak into it.
Is that better? Yeah.
That's great.
I
Thank you.
think it was turned off. Michael Harlock, 533 Redwood. I am the architect. When we got together with Sandra and Kevin, they made it clear that this had to be done on a budget, and they would like to preserve as much as possible the existing house the way it is. And actually, I didn't at the time have any argument with that, because this house is really, I see it as sort of back to basics. I grew up in the East, and you know, if for lack of a better genre, I think it's could be called a salt box. And we do a lot of second story addition, I think you know, and to the ranch, tract ranches that we have in East and West Corte Madera. This is not it. And it makes great sense in many cases to set back second stories in those instances. But this is like 3/4 of a salt box, sort of if somebody took a bite out of the back of it. That's what the existing condition is. So their program made absolutely perfect sense to me, to the extent that, yeah, we could have considered a ground floor addition, but it made very little sense to me. It turns out it would be a lot more impactful to the neighbors in terms of setbacks. If you look at not only is the exterior a salt box, but it's also a very traditional design where the main living, dining room, kitchen are downstairs with a laundry, and all the two very small bedrooms are upstairs. So we would, I mean, to put the big need is a third bedroom, of course, and a bath to go with it. There's just a tiny, modest-sized bath upstairs. But the two bedrooms are already upstairs. The stair is in the right position to serve that third bedroom. It just, to me, was meant to happen that way. And, Peter just, they don't have a, in this case, they don't have a 0.4 FAR. It's 0.48 because of the smaller lot. They're actually going from 0.25 to 0.35. So they're short of not only a 0.4, but they're quite short of 0.48. Just because I was looking, by the way, Doug's done such a terrific job of summarizing this and working with us, working with neighbors. And I want to give credit to my clients who have really reached out multiple times and looked at concerns, even to generate a very sophisticated shading study. Doug, could you pull up I think one of your first slides was the immediate neighborhood, sort of a Google Earth shot. That's it. This is believe me, Kevin has done a stellar job of really looking at solar impact on this. He works for Autodesk, so he's not an amateur. And when I saw this slide again, I just was thinking, I mean, that pretty much shows you, and that we know shadows vary all time, but the benefit of this 18-foot side yard, which we're not doing anything with, in terms of a typical summer shadow, I guess you would say, well short of the property lines. Now, I'm sure the neighbors will talk about a low angle winter sun in the morning, is sort of worst case, and I think there's some very marginal additional shadowing from this. But in fact, even if we had a flat roof, which I would hate to see on this addition, it really wouldn't change the solar angles all that much, and I'd really hate to see that. So I think that's about it. That's the high points. This makes great sense to me. If we were starting over again, you'd look at that western facade and the top lower, which the window placement is sort of what happens on a house that grows over time. It's not exactly lovable. But the only windows we're adding, as a matter of fact, on both the east and west, on the west, just two very high windows over the bed wall on the upper left. And on the east, they've actually reduced the size of the kitchen window at their request, just to limit privacy. It's important to look at the windows that they're actually adding. And then upstairs, you couldn't be more benevolent to neighbors. They have an existing oval window that they didn't use before. And so we're using it as a clear story over the vanity in the master bath. And other than that, there's no windows facing east, new windows facing east or west. So I'd like to open it up to your questions. And again, the applicants, I'm left it up to them to really speak to the very reasonable needs of our growing family.
Thank you. All right. Applicant, and we'll reserve the right to grill Mr. Harlock later.
Oh, I jumped the gun, sorry.
I don't know.
Kevin Crumwoody, here with my wife Sandra. We're residents at 406 Manzanita. I think I don't need to go into too much more detail because, Doug, thank you. You've done a great job. And Michael, thank you for summarizing everything. I think you guys summed it up well. We are extremely passionate about adding more room to our house. We actually bought this house with the purpose of moving in and hoping to expand someday. We saw that it had limitations. We were able to afford some modest changes when we moved in, as Doug said, to make the upstairs more livable. And it was going to be some time before we could get around to a second phase that would allow us to expand it. At the time, my wife was pregnant with our daughter, and we were expecting at some point that they were going to get bigger and our house would need to get bigger along with it. So in fact, if we could have afforded it, we would have liked to have done this quite a bit earlier, but we took the time to save the appropriate amount of money so that we could do this comfortably, and we are excited that now is the time. Our kids are in middle school, and they're getting bigger, and their room is staying the same size. So we're quite excited, and they're excited. Our kids are excited to get their new rooms as well. We have a boy and a girl, so changing clothes, basic things like sharing a bathroom and changing clothes and doing homework are a challenge in the small house. So we're making do right now, but we're really excited about the change. Regarding a single story addition, we did think about that. One of the primary benefits of moving into this property is that it does have a large yard. My son plays soccer, my daughter plays volleyball, and they enjoy our backyard. I grew up in the Midwest where we had large flat yards, and this was important to me, and this is why I purchased the house. Is because I did actually see, and it kind of has a natural, like Doug mentioned, it looks like the house is missing a piece, and we wanted to put the piece back on the back. It just seems to naturally be the right place for a master bedroom. And then finally, and very important to us as well, is we have talked about, does it make sense to have a bedroom downstairs, and we don't feel secure or comfortable with our kids in a different floor than we are. So we would like to share the same floor. We'd prefer it to be an upper floor. That's just our preference. And we want to be on the same floor with our kids, not only to enjoy more time with them, but also to feel more secure having them up there with us. I feel like if we added additional rooms downstairs, we would be, one, separated from them, and two, it would probably make the existing upstairs maybe less used and less appealing. Not to mention, Doug mentioned budget and Michael mentioned budget. That is a huge consideration for us as well. We're on a tight budget. We're trying to do what we can with the property as it exists to kind of maximize our needs but minimize our cost. So I think that's it. Any questions?
All right. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
No.
No. Bob?
Yeah, Kevin, one thing that I noticed when I was out was that the siding on the back part of the house is different than the siding on the front.
That's right.
And I couldn't tell from the application whether things are going to be matched or replaced on the backside to match the siding on the front.
It would be matched to match the siding on the front, yes. Which I think we've represented on the color drawings, the horizontal siding wrapping around the entire house. And we'll match the trim as well, and the divided light windows.
Good, all right. Jennifer?
I don't have any questions,
All
thank
right.
you.
Mr. Lee?
I also do not have any questions.
All right. I just have one set of questions for you guys. And it's really Michael, but anybody can answer. On the drawings, the existing and the future chimney heights are shown at two different elevations, and I'm not sure which represents the reality. And in the application, it looks like that's the 2 foot higher than the nearest point, 10 feet away, so that looks like it would be the final design. Is that fair to say?
Well,
Yeah, would you step over, please?
there was no intent to change the fireplace or chimney. And I think, you know, if I can mea culpa, I think it just in early, I had it wrong. And I think the upper is closer to the truth. I guess it's conceivable they may have to raise it a little bit to meet code, but we really haven't explored that yet. Probably will in the working drawings.
Are these guys called plan checkers in the building department? They'll get all over you for that. So just kidding.
No, I'm acknowledging that, yeah.
Okay.
We just haven't studied it, and so what's represented there is the existing.
Right, so just don't build it as it's represented, build it as it's required. So, thank you. The other question I had for you, given the salt box design, is that did you look at running a ribbon of eave around one side that sort of hangs over in the existing? That would be the eastern elevation where the current one-story eave sticks past the side of the house a little bit, right? So if you ran a little eyebrow around it, does that, in your mind, or would it do something to help the overall bulk of those elevations?
I'm not, Peter, I'm not entirely sure I understand.
So the old residence has the front lower roof that sticks out past the two-story portion a little bit.
So if we look at the screen here, I can sort of use the cursor. Are you saying on this elevation, this sort of detail?
Yeah, right.
With that,
An eyebrow there would, even though you don't have a lower roof, just the sheer or the big wall size on either west or eastern elevation. Some of these homes have an eyebrow to break up the wall height, right?
I think you just, if I'm hearing you correctly, I wouldn't call it an eyebrow, just like a band joist, like a story level division.
That's the minimal.
Am I hearing that?
Yeah, sort of,
Yeah.
but some people put a little eave, shed roof, running around the building like that. The remainder of the
That's
eave.
not salt
I
box.
wouldn't do the latter, but we actually have talked about, with the applicants, and they're thinking, if I'm hearing it correctly, just running a storyboard or a band, I
Frieze.
call it a band joist.
Yeah,
I think it's being considered. If the commission felt strongly about it, I think it's something that they could consider.
okay.
We certainly wouldn't want to overdo that.
No.
Because there's, in the vernacular, there's really nothing
Right.
wrong with a two-story uninterrupted wall.
That's true. Phyllis?
I was thinking, Michael, and I agree with you about the salt box, because the first thing I thought when I looked at the house, I was thinking of the side streets in Williamsburg or up in New England, where I grew up. And one of the features of a salt box is the straight side walls. I would not add a lip or
Sure.
any of the things on the eave. I think it follows through the ideas of the original design and should stay the way it's drawn. I wouldn't add to it. on, with this, just this particular style and stuff, because
Okay.
it's so true
yeah.
to, as I say, the New England type salt boxes.
We'll get into that later then. Thank you, Michael. Any other elements from the applicant?
Oh, I had one more question I'd
sure.
like to ask. I just thought, I've learned not to assume anything. As long as you're changing the roof on the house, you are going to be changing the roof on the garage too?
Shingles, you mean?
Mm-hmm, the shingles on.
Yeah, I know there's older green shingle on
That's-
the garage. I'm going to have to turn that over to Kevin. I think you'd probably like to do it at some point.
think you
It's,
should.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. That's an off-the-record comment that he said he doesn't object to doing that, right? So, okay.
Put it on the record.
Great. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right, so now we'll let the neighbors come up and speak to us about their feelings. So you each have 3 minutes to make a presentation, a statement, or whatever you'd like to say.
Before I make the presentation, can I ask a question about shade study?
Please go up and ask that question. If you're going to public comment, that would be a part of,
3 minutes?
yes, please.
I'll just try to read this off quickly, since I only have 3 minutes.
Please state your name.
My name's Scott Hafer, and I'm the owner of 218 Chapman. Okay, the issue for me is, should I support a project that devalues my property without fair compensation? The answer is, of course not. If the project moves forward, then it will deprive my tenant and future tenants the joy of early morning sunlight. My tenant thinks that a lack of sunlight in and around my house will damage my rental income. I can't find fault with her reasoning. I know that Mr. Cromweedy believes that the value of my property will not be negatively impacted. In fact, in his own words, his project is likely to help elevate values in the neighborhood overall. His statement is an opinion and not a fact. A material fact is that I now have a tenant that is unhappy about losing sunshine and who pays her rent on time. If opinions matter, I would say most people prefer sunlight and a view of the sky than shaded areas in and around their home. Maybe this is a reason for shade studies. Without a proper study or simulations, or something more than just simulations and estimates, I think an exact figure for damages is difficult to determine, but I'm sure of one thing. The damages are significant and not nothing. If I'm asked what a partial remedy should be for my damages, I would have to imagine how much a tenant in a highly priced rental market would pay for sunshine. I think it is reasonable to assume that a tenant may be willing to pay between $50 to $100 a month extra for a more sunny house and yard during the morning hours. If my family intends to keep our house for the next 40 years, then that $50 per month for 40 years would add up to $24,000, assuming no inflation. Of course, if I assume a higher value of $100, then the damage to my property would be $48,000. I may not live another 40 years, but my relatives that inherit our house most likely will. This damage could continue for many generations into the future. So far, the decision makers for the project have offered no meaningful remedy. As a gesture, I appreciate that they offered to plant trees, but the trees do not bring sunlight, just the opposite. Therefore, I'm left with no choice than to be 100% against the Cromweedy's project. Do I have to stop? I just have one paragraph.
One sentence or
I'll
two,
try
that's
to-
fine. All
I'll
right.
try to rip through it.
Thank you, please.
If the Cromweedys or anyone think that my position is harsh, I hope they consider the fact that my family did absolutely nothing to oppose their second-story addition that has already severely reduced the sunlight in my backyard, porch, kitchen, and dining room. Please understand that my lot size is substandard and very small. My tenant already lives in very cramped conditions, and any further obstruction, whether of yard or sky, creates a more claustrophobic environment. At this time, I'm unopposed to the Crumweedy's parking variance because I neither live on Manzanita nor know the specific situation there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, please.
May I submit these pictures to the board here?
Certainly, yeah.
Clarify things or, may I talk about it really quickly? My name is Guy Cloud. I'm boyfriend of Sylvia, who lives at 218 Chapman. And what we have here, these pictures here show you the difference in sunlight from the kitchen area that has been, shaded since the first edition went up, to then looking into the dining room area, which is not shaded in the morning. And there's no artificial light, there's nothing, it's just, that's the difference that you see. And when you, on the outside of the building, you can see really exactly the shadow of the older structure, and then you can also see the story poles and see how much that shadow will completely eclipse the window and cut off all morning light into the that whole side of the building, or any part of the building actually, forever, because the house is never going to be moved. And is it the very last picture there, just that you know, is when in the afternoon, I took it this afternoon, the sun actually finally eclipses the entire patio, and that's only at 2 o'clock, was it 2:40, I think it was, when I took that picture. And so when they talk about only an hour's worth of shade, that it might be maximum, that's actually a large chunk, because the sun's only in that patio from like, what, 10:30 or so until 2:30. So we're talking a quarter of the time additional now of shade on top of it. But the most important part is in the very, very early morning, the sunshine still gets in around the corner of the new addition and lights up the entire house, and that completely will stop and will never come back. So thank you for your time, and I hope the pictures are illustrative.
Thank you very much. Who's next, please?
I'm Heidi Hafer, and I'm the owner of 400 Manzanita that's situated on the corner of Chapman and Manzanita, and share the property line with 406 Manzanita. My property and the two houses next to it on Chapman are unique in the neighborhood, in that we have very tiny lots, and the only outdoor living space that we have is the tiny space that faces 406 Manzanita. And in my case, this outdoor space consists of only a small deck. About 10 years ago, when Kevin and Sandra purchased their home, they raised the height of the second-story roof. I did not oppose this change, but it did have more impact on my property than anticipated. I lost sunlight on my deck and in one room at certain times of the year. And where I once saw treetops and sky, my house now faces a large wall. So I have firsthand experience of the kind of unpleasant impact that the currently proposed construction is likely to have. I can expect to lose more light and views. However, I do recognize that my neighbor's children have a real need for more room. They have a very, very tiny bedroom, and I'm trying to be understanding about those needs. I would be willing to give up more now and support the current project if I had strong reassurance from the town that there would not be expansion of the neighbors' buildings to the west in the direction of my property line sometime in the future. If a second story is added now, then if the walls of the house are later moved closer to the property line, my backyard and that of the other Chapman houses would end up in a dark canyon of walls. When I brought up my concerns with Kevin, his reply was not entirely reassuring. He wrote that I am not currently planning any additional work, but we are within our rights to update our property should we need to in the future in accordance with city requirements. This leads me to believe that future expansion of 406 Manzanita beyond the current project is indeed contemplated or might be contemplated by future owner. So I like my neighbors very much, and I would like to support the project, but I can only do so if I know that my property value and the quality of life for the residents of my house will not be further diminished by future construction projects beyond this one.
Thank you. Are you going to jump up there, please?
Yes. Here's some pictures I'll explain. Please excuse my poor artistry. My name's Al Selby. I live at 217 Chapman Drive. I first want to acknowledge the difficulties in raising a growing family. I've raised 3 children. I know what those challenges are like, and I wouldn't presume to tell the applicants how to deal with it. We all, make our own choices for that. Unfortunately for me, as opposing the project, this is, I suppose, the best time of year to show really expansive views because there is absolutely no foliage, I'm probably not saying that right, no leaves on the trees and no other growth, so that you have the clearest view. And I'm not sure whether it's 3 months of the year or 4 that it exists like this, but for most of the year when the trees are all in full bloom, and that's what you'll see by my poor marking on the pictures, which is really just my approximation, is when you look at what the view is most of the year, and when you add that addition, it takes a significant portion of my view away. And it does so not just from one window, but it does so from all my windows in my dining room, my living room, and a bedroom that we use as an office. And also, as far as features in views, the addition would block 100% of our what we have, which is admittedly a limited view of the East Bay Hills. We would have no view of the East Bay Hills. And also, where we currently, during some times of the year, can see the fog rolling in on the bay, that would be taken away too. So those are 2 features that would be 100% eliminated. And so I guess from my point of view, as my renderings aren't that great, it would be really good if we could have pictures from another time of the year, but it's not that time of year now, so I can't provide the accurate pictures. But I think what I've provided at least gives a little bit more of an example of what we would lose for the larger part of the year. So I think that's it.
All right, thank you.
Any questions? No?
Questions? No, I think you've said it, what you wanted to say.
Yeah.
Pictures show it.
One last comment. In the reports, I believe, with all due respect to Michael, in the architect's report and perhaps the town's findings at all, they say that they don't find that the views are significantly impacted. Obviously, we know that's an opinion and everybody's going to have a different one, so it's not a fact. For me, they're very significantly impacting my views.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to get up and say something tonight? All right. For the benefit of ourselves here, I'm not going to close the public hearing yet. Adam, would you mind staff's evaluation of the future expansion rights and process that anyone, an applicant would have to go through so that it's accurately represented? Or Mr. Bush, either one. So who wants to answer?
Sure. I'll start and see where we go from here. But it's difficult to some degree because we tell people this all the time. Like we can't tell you exactly what the process would be until we see what is being proposed. So a lot of our regulations, but I would say any significant change to the structure would require design review. And in fact, we would also either be a whole design review or amendment to the existing permit. So, but it would be a discretionary process. We do have thresholds for additions of square footage if it's less than 250 square feet, therefore you don't trigger a design review requirement. Obviously, there are setbacks that are required for all properties and all development that would still remain. But as long as there is available floor area and development was within setbacks, an application could be made in the future. But it would likely be discretionary approval. We'd be back in front of the Planning Commission at some point with an application. There are exceptions to that, just to be clear.
Right, so in no way is there such a thing as a condition placed on the property that their rights are abrogated for any future discussion or application. It becomes a review that is subject to the
Yeah, I mean,
impact it has.
there's all, obviously any property owners can voluntarily put in place any sort of deed restrictions they would want, but it's not something the town would be involved in. But, so, no, conditions of restricting future development rights, I would not recommend the commission going down that road.
Right, no, we wouldn't. Thank you, thank you. Before we get into a discussion, do any commissioners have any questions for anyone that has been out, the applicant, the architect, or any of the neighbors? Does anybody have any questions they'd like to pose for any of those?
Yeah, I'd ask Doug, the issue of, we're always dealing with the issue of sunlight, privacy, and view blockage in relationship to second stories. Is there any literature or studies on the impact of sunlight on property values of the adjoining properties that you're aware of?
No, I mean, what we're using is, we're looking at the design review findings and then using that as a guidance for evaluation, and property values are not something that's specifically part of those findings. I think, this is kind of I think something that we hear in these sort of applications is this sort of tug of war between when does a improvement to a home increase everyone's property values, when does it hurt property values. I mean, I can't comment too much in that regard.
All right. Only questions, Phyllis, yeah, I don't want to go into any
Yes.
statements yet.
No.
Yeah.
Mr. Scott, the first person who spoke, I just want to be sure I understand what you're saying. You want to be paid monetary damages so this couple can build the addition on their house. You brought up damages several times and did a whole figure going out 40 years. So I'm just wondering what you are asking for, because this is a new one on me.
Please step up to the microphone.
I know it's a good question.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not expecting them to actually pay me monetary damages. I was taking a hypothetical situation that I felt seemed realistic in my mind. In this area, the rental values are very high, and people are willing to pay a lot for just something simple like sunlight. And it seems very reasonable to me that if you get someone who's willing to pay a fortune for their rent, they might be willing to put aside an extra $50 a month to have sunshine. Doesn't that seem perfectly logical to you?
We're not in a discussion here,
Yeah.
so if you have a response to a
Wait,
question.
you brought up the subject.
I know, it's not, you
I'm
answer the question,
okay.
please, and then that's simply that. If you have something to say, then that's all we can ask of you, so.
Well, did I answer the question appropriately?
I think you did, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Okay, none? Thank you. Any other comments before I close the public hearing? That anybody wants to get from the applicant, the neighbors?
No, thank
Okay.
you.
All right, with that said, we're going to close the public hearing and bring it up to the dais here for discussion. So we've heard a fair amount about impacts and whether we think that they are significant enough for the resolution. Finding number 3, I believe it is. So, Mr. Lee, I'd like to start with you over there and see what your response is to the architecture, to the addition, and to the findings.
Okay. So on the relationship of the building to the rest of the neighborhood, I think it's not in that case its relationship to the rest of the neighborhood, but itself. And I think that's where the architect did get it correct in keeping with the character of it. I think it's a very nice historical piece. I don't think it's protected, right? But I think it's a very valuable piece in its simplicity. And, you know, there's a lot of other Northern California communities. I'm thinking Mendocino County, you know, like Mendocino and those types of communities where those are really valuable assets. And so improving them even better and without really knocking down the character. And, you know, the solid wall in that instance, I think, is the right solution. You know, and that's why it's good that we get to evaluate each property individually, because there's definitely been other houses where that was, and other buildings where that is, you know, that other solution that you put forward might be really applicable. So in that, in my mind, it's a really nice from a design standpoint. It's a very well thought out design, very unified. So then we get into the neighbors and its relationship to the neighbors. I think that those 3 houses on those properties were ill-advised in the beginning with their relationships to the backyards. You know, and it's kind of a condition that everybody accepted when they moved in. The other, and yes, you have a relationship with the neighbor, and I understand that it will have impacts. One of the things with the direct light from east and west facing direct light, whether it's in the afternoons or in the mornings, is that as a designer, the majority of the buildings that I design from a sustainable and light control standpoint, we actually try to mitigate that. It's not a desirable lighting condition. You want reflected light at those conditions usually. It's a personal choice for some people, but as far as I understand it from a building design standpoint, I don't know that it's detrimental to the functioning of the building. And reflective light is still there. It's, you know, when you're looking at shadow studies, maybe in larger locales, you know, these large buildings can block out the sun all day and really block it out. And you're in canyons and you can't get more light in there. And I don't know that it's going to create that. I really looked at the studies and I didn't get a sense that it was really.
Sorry, you can't, public hearing is closed. I'm
This
sorry.
this is how I see it.
And you can address us, Charles, so that's.
Right.
fine.
Okay. So so that's my personal take on it as a designer and how I understand it. And it in no way makes it better for you guys, and so I acknowledge that, but that's how I see it. So I guess from a design standpoint, and then also the views, you know, we've talked a lot about it, right? There are definitely in the zoning and the general plan specific views that are kind of addressed and that we really have to consider very strongly. There's other ones. Everybody wants to see trees. Everybody wants to see more open space, right? But we also live in communities of houses. And houses, if done right, are actually beautiful. And people like looking at really nice houses. And Chapman and all those, that whole neighborhood has a ton of beautiful houses. And I think that actually adds as much value, if not more, than a few trees. So in that way, I also don't see it as having a real significant impact on those views. So I can also make the findings for that in this instance. The third thing is the variance on the garage. The garage has been there for quite some time. I don't think that the neighborhood seemed a little congested on street, but you know, in general, there was still a lot of on-street parking when I visited. And you know, I'm not a car culture kind of guy. I don't actually think it's good to encourage more car use, and I don't like front yards that are just giant garage doors. So I'm happy to make the variance for the garage and allow them to do the addition without providing the second space in this instance. And so that's how I see it. I can make the findings.
Thank you very much. Well said, thank you. Jennifer, like your thoughts on those elements as well.
Okay. I also am in agreement on just the architectural character. I think the salt box was a new term to me tonight, but that is exactly what the look and feel is. And after having spent some time on the East Coast, I would agree that it's consistent with what's currently there. I think that it's great that the applicant's going to improve their property, and I am a very strong believer in any appraisal you do, the number one thing they look to is sales comps, and it only improves everyone's home values for people to spend money and improve them. And I've said this before, but I think Corte Madera is in desperate need in many of the neighborhoods, including this one, for people to spend money on their properties, and I think it's great that you guys are going to do that here. I do not find the impact of this to be significant or particularly adverse to the neighbors on Chapman or Manzanita. I agree. The folks that are here tonight at 400 Manzanita, 218 and 214, those are, unfortunate that the lot was split in that way, but I don't think that that should impede the applicant from improving their home and this project. So I can make finding number 3 as well. And lastly, the variance, it's an existing condition, and I agree with everything Charles said in a very articulate manner. So I am very supportive of this project moving forward as is.
Thank you. Phyllis?
I am supportive of this project, and it would make...
I'm sorry, please. You do not interrupt. We have a process here, and we gave you a chance. So this is a process, we go through it. Thank you. Phyllis, please.
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
And I would go along with the variance for the garage because it exists. I mean, if the garage was moved back, the setback, torn down and built within the setback, it would be blocking light of those 3 homes that are next to it, which I understand was built by one person, then he gave one to each of his children. I don't think there should have been 3 homes on that lot to begin with, but they're there and they're staying. But it makes no sense to move the garage. As I say, I like the salt box garage, maybe because the design, maybe because I am from the East Coast. But it works. I think the addition works with the existing house. It fits. It looks right. It doesn't look like something was just added onto it. If you add it on to the back of the home into the backyard, the second story would look like a bump on a log. It's kind of strange looking now the way it was done. So I think that this should go forward as designed. They say it's unfortunate that those 3 homes in a row were built almost up to the property line. One looks like it actually is, the one at 400 Manzanita. And there is no reason why the property owner who wants to improve his property should not be able to, because those other 3 homes were built in a way that certainly would not be allowed today. That's it.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Phyllis. Dr. Bundy?
Yeah, I struggled with this a lot after visiting the home, looking at the lot itself and in proximity to everything else, and tried to look at what would be involved if it was an expansion on the first floor. and ultimately concluded, given the narrowness of the lot and the issue with the garage and such, that you would end up with a tear down and a completely different house, which would certainly blow any budget anybody had for doing an addition. I do like the fact that from Manzanita, there's not really much change to the house. The front stays the same. There'll be a little detail to the east. I think that will enhance that. And so ultimately, I think this will, as everybody says, improve some of the property values around just by comps. And I regret that it does have impacts on Mr. Selby, as well as some of the light impacts on the adjacent neighbors. But ultimately, on balance, I believe I can make the findings and support the variance for parking.
Thank you, Bob. A couple of questions for staff relative to Phyllis's comments here. So the Chapman houses then are on essentially 2,000 or somewhere in that neighborhood square foot lots. And they do or do not have, I mean, they wouldn't conform to any setbacks, or what would be the condition now of trying to put something on those lots?
So if you were to create a new lot, if let's say there were no lots in this area, it wasn't a neighborhood, and you wanted to cut it up into parcels, they would have to be at least 7,500 square feet. So even the majority of the lots on the street, aside from those exceptional examples, are below that standard by today's standards. The front setback would have to be a minimum of 15 feet. On the corner lot, the street side setback, I think, would be over 10 feet. Rear setback is 25 feet. So if they were 2,500 square foot lots and someone wanted it,
So
based on setbacks alone, unbuildable.
So, yeah, in 1948, they didn't probably have the setbacks on these properties, and whatever, they just got built on their 47, 48.
Right.
So-
I mean, just to elaborate a little bit on that, I mean, you can see the arrangement of the other lots on the corners. It's a very unique situation. Probably at the time this was done, even in 48, it was an unwise subdivision of a lot into 3 separate lots, precisely because of the issues that it's bringing up in some ways this evening. We don't see this condition very often. It's extremely unique to anywhere, I think, in Corte Madera. You could, even in the surrounding neighborhood, the corner lots that you otherwise see have conditions that allow it to work with surrounding properties much better.
Okay. Go ahead, Phil.
As long as we're discussing this from 47, 48, I'm wondering if it was one lot, man who owned it had built the 3 houses on it, and then it was subdivided later
I don't know.
as
Yeah.
part of the estate, because I cannot see creating lots of that size, even in 1947 or 1948.
Right. Okay. We hate to see an impact of design on neighbors. That one neighbor takes great umbrage at, and yet I think that these owners at the 406 are within their rights to do this. We cannot condition the property for future development, but, a future development would have to come back before the staff and before the commission if anybody ever decided to do something over there. If this commission wouldn't approve such a addition at this point. But this one, I feel, is appropriate for the lot. I think it's appropriate for the neighborhood. You see other homes in the neighborhood that have second stories that do the same thing this one is going to do for this small footprint of that 500 square feet on the second floor there. So, I think it has plenty of comparable structures in the neighborhood. I think there are many conditions that are like this, and I think this does increase the value of everything in the neighborhood. Being in that house, it's a postage stamp second floor. So they can do this, and I think they're within their rights, and I think it's well-designed for what it is, and it's simple. I don't think that the sunlight and view loss is significant enough to adversely affect this. I have people in my neighborhood that I have to put up with now looking down into my yard and my house. It's part of what happens in a community. It just does, and I can't do anything about it. They built a very nice house, so now we have shades. It happens. I don't think it's unusual. I think this is less impactful than some of the things we've looked at. So I think they've correctly reached out, and in this case, I can make the findings for this addition, and I also agree that the variance should be allowed. So, with that said, does anybody have anything else they want to add before I ask for a motion?
Hopefully you guys can all learn to live together on the same block.
Well, to Jennifer's point, we've asked that people do figure out a way to become better neighbors. I don't know that that's always possible, but it's the right thing to do. So, anyway, these are lovely people, and they have great kids, and I'm sure your guys are all very nice people as well. So, with that said, and I hear a motion for this resolution 18-004.
I can make a motion to approve design review application PL 2017-0123 and variance application PL -2017-0124 for a 647 square foot addition to an existing two-story dwelling and a variance to maintain one on-site parking space where two are required.
I second the motion.
All right. Call the vote, please.
Commissioner Bundy,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Aye.
Chairman Chase.
Aye. Thank you very much. So,
I'll read the appeal rights.
Yep, we're reading that right.
Get to that right here. Following action by the planning commission at a public hearing or meeting, any decision of the planning commission may be appealed to the town council within 10 calendar days. Appeal forms are available at the planning department, Corte Madera Town Hall, and a $300 filing fee is required.
there you have it. Thank you. I'll give the room a few minutes to clear out, and then we're going to go on to the rest of our agenda. I'll get seated and go into
I'm sorry.
Commissioner reports. I attended the last town council meeting. And I think that the first thing to report on was the ordinance for the increase in sales tax, and that all of the council was in support of the 3/4 cent level. And there was in the staff packet, there was information on the town expenses that are ballooning, and they have to come up with 11 million bucks right now and 50 million by 2030 just to deal with what's going on in terms of maintenance and town costs. So there was a discussion of land use regulation relative to hotels, and I'm going to let Mr. Wolf report on that, because I think that's his specialty, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent
Specialty.
anything that was said, except that the idea was to discuss at the council level adjusting or doing something or not regarding hotel uses. And beyond that, there really wasn't much of interest, and it was a good short meeting. But, Bob?
I was just going to say, in relationship to the sales tax increase, I think part of the rationale for trying to increase it was then also putting on the ballot that the current flood tax will be rescinded. So we're paying about $100 a month, $100 a year for the flood tax. That expires in 2023. Because we haven't had flooding, it would probably be unlikely to get a 2/3 majority to pass. And so the flood infrastructure is going to be incorporated into that 3/4 cent sales tax, which only requires 50 plus 1 to
Yeah.
pass.
Because it's a general tax, which means the money goes into, if it was a specific tax listed for certain things were listed that are only things that could be paid for out of that tax, it would take 2/3, 66.7%. If it is a general tax done at the time there is an election, such as our council members being elected, it could be 50%, and in essence, the money goes into the general fund. But it's the way you write it, saying these are the priorities we would pay for, and there is a committee made up of residents who actually monitor it and make sure the money is going into those forms. You may have seen reports once a year. Karen Jabosi chairs that committee, and she gives the report of what monies were spent in which categories that are currently listed.
Yeah, she does they do a great
She's
job.
very good at that.
The only other thing that I would report on, and because it will probably come before us, is the town expansion, right? Because it'll be a significant add. Does the town have to submit to the planning commission for their expansion of town hall?
Of course.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
So they better
that'll,
be nice to us.
it's,
They're expanding the town hall, like where we're sitting right now.
well, they want to go one way or another, somewhere on the property. So it'll end up coming before us, but they're going to spend some real money on figuring out how to best get from one building to the other and how big it should be. And I jokingly said to Adam, maybe they should add housing on the second floor. So with that said, Mr. Wolf.
But it's in a mixed-use district?
No, it's, so, sir, you,
Sure, yeah, I'll report on an item that was brought to the town council regarding hotels, as you mentioned, and the item was really to review the existing land use regulations related to hotels in town. Obviously, I think there's been articles and public statements by the owner, particularly of the Corte Madera and Best Western, that they're looking at other uses. I think that has caught the attention, obviously, of town staff, including town manager Todd Cusimano, and ultimately decided the council should have discussion regarding sort of our existing land use regulations, and if there's seen to be some needed changes to those regulations or not, as Chairman Chase mentioned. And so the staff report really went over our existing regulations, compared it to other municipalities, and in terms of focusing in particular, I should say, on floor area ratio, and looked at how we treat hotels versus how other jurisdictions, their regulations for hotels. And the council, town council did have a very, I think, a good discussion about different ways. It was clear that they did believe that something should be done to encourage hotels, as they were, the council, I'm sort of summarizing here, but both individually and I think collectively thought that they're obviously important uses to the town from an economic standpoint and from a local business standpoint, and provide value to residents as well. So it was clear that those are important uses, and that something could be done to increase floor area ratio. And there's some different opinions about how best to do that, but I think the majority of the council gave some direction to staff that they would like to see sort of an incentive structure or a bonus structure set up whereby potentially additional FAR could be achieved for hotel uses if certain criteria were met. And so that's something that they directed staff to continue to work on and look at. It's something that ultimately, and I should say, some of this, we've, in terms of the incentive or bonus structure, is already in some of our regulations. For example, the mixed-use MX1 district has that already in place. So it's sort of consistent with some of the framework we already have in place with some of our zoning districts. And so any changes, though, just so the planning commission's clear, any changes to the ordinance or in such an ordinance would have to clearly go for public meetings and public hearings before the planning commission and then back to the town council. And so that would be, there may even be, yet to determine, but there may even be more of a preliminary step where there's more of a discussion item in front of the planning commission and town council on that subject, and sort of as the framework gets better developed to see if staff is moving in a direction that is appropriate. So.
Yes, and the things, there's 4 hotels, and the Marin Suites, the highest with .82, the Best Western with .42, the Budget Inn with .27, and America's Best Value Inn at .48. So, and per your staff report, the Corte Madera Inn was asking to go from .34 to .55. And so I'm just saying this because, per Adam's point, it's going to be before us, and we should be thinking well in advance of what seems reasonable and right.
Yeah, and I think even there was just some council members in their discussion talked about, it's not really about FAR, it's about getting the right project, and so does the FAR, where you set it, it's better to set it that will allow for flexibility in a sense, whether it's our current hotels or a new hotel in the future or whatever, long-term thinking. It does so as long as the criteria. I think that was pretty clear from all the council members that there's criteria regarding design, regarding character, and environmental. Should I mention they are similar to the types of things that Commissioner Metcalf has previously mentioned to the council in terms of sort of good design elements.
Right.
Those were raised. So,
Charles, you had
Yeah. So in these potential future public engagements about how to incentivize hotel development, is FAR the only discussion topic, or will it be an open format for public to actually?
I don't want to get into specifics of potentially what it might be, but FAR was the focus. So at this point, that's, I think, the direction that staff is going to be going in. I think there are potentially, as we look deeper into the existing regulations, there may be other areas. We noted, for example, in other jurisdictions have potential flexibility for whether it's height or setback or something like that for special economic uses that are important to the town. So, there are the development standards may be part of that discussion. I'm just not ready to say that that's
I just didn't know
possible.
if it was a very focused discussion or if it.
It was focused, I will say, but I've personally, when we sit down and start to craft this, it may involve some other aspects.
Phyllis, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Yes, I'm just making a note here.
We're not.
2 things. First, more general one here. I couldn't make the meeting, so I did send a letter to the council as a resident of things.
Right.
And I looked at, there were 3 ways that you could go about it. One would be to zone specific lots for hotels. The second one was to, it's almost having a split FAR in the sense that on appropriate commercial lots, you'd have your .34, but if a hotel was put on it, it could then be let's say 5. And then the third one was to individually look at lots similar to what happened with the Best Western, which I think leads to a lot of controversy that is necessary. And my first question for you is, of those three, A, B, and C, which one did they wish to go ahead with?
It was more of the B, so I think there was a discussion over just of that, and that was the options or certain potential options for them to consider. But it was ultimately, again, some different opinions, but ultimately, I think it wasn't calling, the majority of the council members thought that we should retain the flexibility for allowing property owners to have a variety of appropriate uses potentially on their lots, but sort of entice or encourage hotel development through incentives or bonuses, while not precluding property owners from potentially other appropriate uses on that on a particular site.
And my other question, I'm only going to mention Best Western, but I'm not speaking specifically of it. When we have, because I've been thinking about this, when we have an application, isn't there a time period in which something has to be done? Because at this point, I am wondering, when you say that different uses will get, does that mean if something new comes up, we start all over again? Or does all the work that's been done previously continue? This is more of how we deal with applications that come in on commercial properties.
I'm not totally sure if I understand the question or how to answer it, but maybe we can follow up with you on that. Are you,
when an application comes in, is there a certain time period in which it has to be acted upon?
Usually there is, if it's usually in a situation where there's an applicant wants action to be done. So so when that is not the case, then those quote unquote requirements aren't sort of put forth onto this. They're not actual.
It's not like code.
Right.
Right.
So there are, but there's sort of, once you start there's no final end date to that process, put it that way.
So if nothing's done for 2 years, it comes back and starts up right where it stopped? See, I'm
Not
thinking.
necessarily, no. There's not a one answer to that question. I mean, there's certain guidelines. You have to look at a variety of things in terms of the information that's in an application. So there's no, I can't answer that without knowing facts of a particular application.
Okay, well, I know several years ago in Belvedere, somebody had gotten approval for a real McMansion. It was huge, and it wasn't built at the time for whatever reason. They came back 3 years later and expected to go forward and couldn't. I'm wondering, are there any time limits in which to do these things?
Well, it's not, we can, again, this is a reporting, it's not a Q&A, so I'd rather, have those.
Well, it's also a request, so, that's why I was trying to figure it out.
I'm happy to answer that.
We don't have an
again.
answer, okay.
I had a very specific question about that, though, just as a learning exercise. When it comes to hotels and zoning, is there like sub-requirements that say certain types of hotels? So, I mean, we're talking, is it nightly stay? Is it monthly? Like, are there ones that the city or the town and the community can you break it down like that in the zone?
How about this? I think if it sounds like there may be a lot of questions about this, if we want to put a business item on the agenda
Yes.
upcoming to talk of just
It would
generally
help-
about
It
them.
would help me understand it
Maybe
better.
that's the best thing to do
Yeah.
rather than get into a discussion on it
In the
here.
meantime, I suggest the staff report that you prepared for the council, could you forward it by email to the other
Sure.
members so
Absolutely.
they could see what the discussion had been about?
Yeah, that makes, absolutely.
Is this going to be something that's determined at council level, or are they going to send a package to us to flesh out and work on?
No, I think the planning commission will definitely be involved. I mean, and like I said, planning commission is required, will be required to weigh in and have a public hearing on anything that gets done in this regard.
Okay.
You know, there may be another, we'll work to see whether or not, there needs to be more direction at this point, or not, or whether it's something that we can work on down here
Okay.
with the commission.
So great, thank you, Adam, for putting up with the queries. So,
But seriously, we can, I'm happy to put something on if that's.
I think we should, just to sort of get us in the thinking mode and understanding it better. That would be
Okay.
very helpful, yes. Regarding the next item, minutes, does anybody have any comments on the minutes from the
I'll
last
move
meeting?
approval of the minutes.
Second, Bob?
I wasn't
Oh,
here for the entire meeting, so
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oh, that's right, you can't.
Yeah.
So that has to be from Mr. Lee.
I second the motion.
Okay.
Let's see, I'll go Commissioner Lee. No, wait, Commissioner, I have to actually, let's go to Commissioner Bundy. You're going to be abstained on this?
Yes.
And Commissioner Friedman is
I'm
absent.
abstaining.
You're abstained. Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Aye.
Chairman Chase.
Aye. So, great. Let's adjourn. Good night.
Night.